make this very quick because this is a fascinating topic, and Karen will masterfully guide us through it. From my perspective, I mean, in our exploration of inclusive leadership, power is so essential. In fact, power and negotiation is so essential. And I couldn't think of a better person than Karen Walch to guide us through this topic, precisely because you've dedicated your professional career to these questions of negotiation and power and so forth, and coming at it from various different perspectives. And we've been working around this topic for many years. So without further ado, I really just want to turn it over to you, Karen, and thank you for doing this for all of us today.
Thank you, Jörg. And you are right. We have studied this topic for many, many years and looked at it from many sides. And I came from the world of political science. And when I met you, Jörg, I was fascinated that so much of political science misses out on a lot of the findings from anthropology, and especially social anthropology, in terms of human behavior. So what I'd like to do today is to explore a little bit about what I've learned by studying and researching power from the political science perspective. And what have I learned throughout all of the years of working with global clients, my own experiences, and what we're doing in the research. So that's why I talk about this title today of power and partnership and negotiation, and how we can look at and develop a mind shift around this concept of power into co-creation. So I had so much fun studying power, and I experienced it a lot working in academia. I was a faculty member at Thunderbird School of Global Management for almost 30 years as a professor, both at Green Bay and Madison, Wisconsin. And then I've done a lot of research and writing, including one of the books that I worked on was with Jörg. We did actually two, one on quantum negotiation, and I'll be referring a lot to our principles and methods and tips from that research. And then also we've done a lot of work on cultural orientations, and that has informed my work a lot. And something I've noticed as I've gone through this study, that there are three pillars to inclusive leadership, into engagement with others, into team building, that I would like to address today. So these three pillars I like to refer to as power, domination, and partnership. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time today looking at how these are pillars to inclusive leadership and to very successful negotiations. So let me just start with power. One of the things that flabbergasted me when I first started learning the principles of political science, first of all, political science is the study of power. And I had gone into graduate school to study power, and I checked all the catalogs, where would I learn the most about power? And it took me to political science. And the fundamental definition of power in political science is the ability and the authority to make others do something they necessarily would not do. And a lot of realpolitik, the ability to manipulate others, is a way to get people to do something they would not do. So there's a lot of psychological work. There's a lot of work done on authority. And as I studied, I came to the field called political psychology, which basically looked at, it's not the limited resources that creates conflict and the need for power over others. It's our ability to shift our perception of how we can share those limited resources. How can we create power with each other in order to build this kind of engagement with each other and outcomes that satisfy all parties? So what do we do once we know what we want in a negotiation? We develop our sense of power And strategy and tactics come out of the pillar that I refer to here as domination. And this is a very old tradition. And we'll talk about this in a little while, more in depth. But in terms of domination, how can I use tricks to get others to do something they necessarily would not do? And if we're going to look at partnerships, how is this a foundation? How is this a barrier to inclusive negotiation, inclusive teams and partnerships and co-creation? So these are the three pillars I'd like to use. And they remind me of a case I just worked on recently. I worked on with a woman who was building a startup educational provider service. So she was a curator of various classes for business education. And she was in a negotiation with her tech provider, the web provider. And this was a fairly large provider, but she needed that particular kind of delivery and platform and learning technology for her own business. And she had prepared, and she also found that the other party would use a lot of power over, a lot of manipulation and control tactics. And in particular, they would keep discrediting each other's alternatives. They would keep discrediting their mission for each other. And they continued to blame each other throughout the negotiation. And as she and I worked, and we used a lot of applied improv techniques, which we're going to talk about as one of the foundations of power with, that she really spent some time thinking a little bit more about how they were actually partners and how she could actually be an inclusive leader by including her other partner into this discussion. And to make a long story short, which we will refer to in a little while, she was able to lead that control, manipulation, domination, very difficult negotiation into one of a partnership. And they eventually co-created new technologies and timelines with each other. But the work to create that kind of culture of inclusiveness took considerable amount of time and skill on her part. Now, don't you think we should stop for a minute and talk about what do we mean by negotiation? And some of the examples I will give have something to do with contracts between buyers and sellers, for example. But what we're really talking about today, and the work that we do in inclusive leadership domain, is really to think about negotiation as any time that I have something that I need, and I need to work through others in order to get it. And there's so many loaded words in this particular definition. First of all, we need to know who we are and what is it that we need, and then how are we going to get what we need. And I have added to this, there are many seen and unseen ways that we can accomplish this. And in terms of the pillars, I see that much of the unconscious work in negotiation preparation has a lot to do with the unseen mindset we have and habits we have around domination or power over versus power with. And a lot of these things are unseen. They are not a mystery. They are relatively easy to identify. And a lot of our work, and you've seen this a lot in the inclusive leadership world, a lot of the work is digging into the unseen. What are some of those motivations? So anytime I'm in a conflict or I'm problem solving, so let's say my family is deciding what are we going to do on Friday night, a movie, or are we going to make a fire and stay at home? Another is that we're sharing limited resources. Have you ever been in a budget meeting and we have a limited budget, and how we can move toward domination and control and defensiveness? How can we turn that budget meeting into one where we can co-create within the limited resources? Other times we're creating something new. A lot of you have work on project teams, for example, or you're working with clients who want to create something new, a new product or a new service. That is a negotiation. And many times we're unconscious of the fact that we are part of that. Creating something new is a negotiation, because all parties have their own needs and interests and goals in mind. And I added this element of change because so much of change management is about negotiating the unseen and the seen new policies and organizational practices. So a lot of what happens just about every day is a negotiation. But some of you might say, well, it's not true. Not every case is a negotiation. And I would say that is true, but with a caveat. So first of all, anything that you're trying to achieve by working through others, first of all, is a negotiation. There are some things as individual contributors we will continue to manifest and to have to practice and strategize and have tactics for. But when you are in a relationship or in a partnership or in a place where two parties need something, these are two principles that are in place. First is, do you have mutual needs? So, for example, in my startup, the educational provider, that she had a need to be able to transmit a lot of the knowledge that she had to around the world, and she needed a virtual platform. And vice versa, her supplier also needed clients. And it was an important combination where their common needs and their divergent needs actually met. So it was a great partnership in terms of what they needed in mutual needs. The next criteria is interesting because this is basically what we might refer to as, are you in a monopoly situation? Meaning there is a policy or a procedure in place. And I work with a lot of people who say their job is around negotiation, but they have to use standard contracts for everything. Basically, they say everything is non-negotiable because it's legally provided in a standard contract. Or on the other hand, it may be the only supplier. If we go back to our educational startup, if this was the only technical provider in the entire world, then she is dependent upon that monopoly and has very little leverage to negotiate. And as we go through talking about negotiation, we're always going to be talking one of the most invisible, unseen elements of negotiation, which is who has leverage. And the one thing that we've learned in working with the concept of power is that power is fluid. And leverage can mean many, many things. And these are the kinds of things we explore when we are doing preparation with our coaching clients, for example. So I've asked this question all over the world, and I always ask, are there situations where there is an absolute monopoly and you have no ability to negotiate? And oftentimes it'll come down to utility companies. You only have one utility provider or cable provider, or it's a particular legal authority that has a monopoly over whether you can be punished or rewarded if you violate those particular rules. They are non-negotiable. They are clear rules and policies that these are non-negotiable behaviors. So why do we care about using power with? And these are some of the things that I have really noticed from people who spend that work in preparation to think about that mindset between domination versus engagement. And what I've actually seen, many would say it's a miracle, but the beauty in increasing our own employee performance and sharing limited resources, creating something new or problem solving provides it's an investment in your own social capital. And I find that there's actually a fun and a joy that comes with that kind of increased resources and opportunities and connections and resonance with other. And in many ways, this is how you develop power, by getting others to help you accomplish your goals. And you'll see that we're going to talk a lot about engagement as a way to help others help you in many ways. And the word that I like to see when I talk to a lot of clients after they've practiced and they've actually applied some of these methods, they actually would say that they really have felt that they have much stronger bonds with their teams and feel even proud of themselves for having spent this time and energy on looking at what they can accomplish. I'd also like to talk of what is even underneath our 3 pillars, and that is the beauty of what we're learning in brain science and about the nervous system today. We're very lucky today to actually have a lot of scientific evidence and historic evidence and anthropological evidence to show what is stress and how does that impact our ability to engage. And there is something biological about this. And we'll talk about how important it is to understand our physical dimensions as well as our emotional and our mental dimensions if we're going to engage with others. And it is true, our brains do wire to protect ourselves, and that we could be triggered by something really negative or reactive behavior. For example, as soon as my example from the Educational Institute, when she started to talk about blaming the other for missing a deadline, and the other started blaming her, it triggered something extremely defensive in her, and she didn't even realize how her brain was that master of conserving energy, and that irritability and it was almost impossible for her to be able to break out of trying to look at his point of view. So we talked a lot about, and it's something we would do in applied improv, is to stop, to take a breath, have some space, and look at yourself on that dance floor or in that particular domain. And she was able to see that she reacted negatively to the other because he was a very fluid time, someone who cared less about being precisely on time, whereas she did. That was a high value to her. So what we're learning about neuroscience is the simple techniques you're learning about breathing and counting and actually taking some time to understand, why are you feeling intimidated? Because sometimes it's just a habit. And what we're finding is a lot of the power over, the domination, the need to control, the need to intimidate the other. Many would say, well, it's just the result that we are all hardwired as human beings to be selfish, self-centered, to want domination and control. We see it acting out in our organizations, in groups, in neighborhoods. There's a realism. We're told that it's more realistic to think about the superior ranking systems, male over female, manager over employees, buyers over sellers. And this intimidation and this kind of hardwired has been completely debunked in what we are finding in long cycles of history, and also in terms of neuroscience, that we are also very egalitarian. And for centuries, human beings have created sustainable environments, communities, and cultures and partnerships based on our fundamental human need to get our needs met, and to do that in the context of others. So a lot of powerful negotiations can be created through leadership, and that starts with each of us looking at our own assumptions about the habits of domination, the raw power that truly exists and that we have to defend ourselves from others. And Jorg and I talk a lot about, we live in a world of quantum paradox right now, which means we are both selfish and we also are sharing. We both, as human beings, cooperate and compete. We have envy and we also have empathy. And this kind of tension between beneficence and maladapted others, that will always exist. And part of the preparation that we do in our work is to spend some time looking at, first of all, how can I have a practice so I can understand more deeply the invisible ways that I think, the way that I feel, the way that I behave, the way I show up and perform, and how does it align with my spiritual practices? And all of us who work in the inclusive leadership world see that you can build cultures, you can lead others to engage, and a lot of that has to do with managing our own nervous system and then being able to help manage the nervous system of the group. And collaborative leadership emerges and is built, and this is a power of engagement that helps others help us, for example. So a lot of the practices then help us get to something you have talked a lot about in the world of cultural differences and a lot of differences in terms of all of the characteristics that we bring to a negotiation, trying to get something that I need by working through other, that we, using brain science, we understand what's under the waterline in terms of how I just described. So for example, the woman who was working in the educational environment, she was just looking at his behavior where he was missing deadlines and he was using fluid time. So she could describe that, but yet she thought that he was ill-prepared, not very professional, and needed to be blamed and instructed and controlled to get back in line. And on her feeling and behaving, she wanted to use more inclusive measures in her negotiation, but she just felt unmotivated to step to his side, to listen to what he did. And a lot of the things that she and I worked on started with looking at how she could stop this rapid cognition of blame and her habit. She likes to cooperate. She wants to be inclusive. However, the minute somebody blamed her for something or didn't perform as she expected, right away she moved to a judgment and a feeling of being victimized by this other individual. And she needed to take some time to step back. So one of the tools we often use in our negotiation preparation, and especially if you're stuck or you've tried every manipulation, dirty trick in the book and you are not moving forward and you still need to work with this particular partner, we will explore this much, much more when we do a lot of our work and negotiation preparation for a 5-minute negotiation or a 5-year negotiation. And this seems quite simplistic, but it is simple in its elegance. That a lot of negotiation work that we do in the preparation is to know who we are. And I'm going to explore that in a minute. And then we're going to explore what we want. That's our targets and our limits. Why we want it. These are the things that concern us the most. And a lot of these things are invisible. I want to be respected. I want my dignity to be honored. Then on the how, that's the strategy and tactics. And then the what if is, what if we don't reach an agreement? What is my alternative or my BATNA? And just doing a lot of this preparation and why the approach that we've developed together as we looked at quantum negotiation is that a lot of the techniques and training and coaching are around what you want. People are really good at setting their targets, knowing those targets, their counter offers, what the other party's targets are. Really good at thinking about their BATNA. Sometimes people forget about that piece, but look at that as a source of power. And how. Everybody loves to get into the strategy and tactics. What's the best way I can manipulate, can trick, use all of those basic dirty tricks? And there's a lot more work today done now on the why. What is the thing that motivates me? What is that invisible concern that I have? What we've really discovered is there's little to no work integrating the who part of our negotiation preparation. So I'd like to use an example of someone I worked with recently, just to give you an idea of how we could use this technique and this tool to unbundle an impasse that one of my clients had. He had originally came from the UK, and he went to New Zealand to work with a company, at a pharmaceutical company, and he was a buyer for a UK company working in New Zealand with a South Korean supplier. And he was completely deadlocked, and he needed this negotiation on many, many levels. So we sat down and we unbundled his case. And in his case, he had a very good what. He had the targets laid out really well. He understood the why. He understood the alternatives that both the Korean company and his company could do. And he also understood the strategy. He wanted to be cooperative, but when we looked back at his behaviors, he said he was very controlling, and he was very impatient and very irritable with his counterpart, and he was not getting anywhere with him. So then we went into his who preparation, which he said he's never really done this. So what we did was look at, first of all, on a cognitive level, and there's a lot of science and research around this integrated mindset of the cognitive ability, the emotional ability, social, physical, and spiritual. You know, you've heard all of the stuff on multiple intelligences. This is all part of our human dimension we bring to negotiation. So, for example, when he and I sat down and started looking at this, we talked about, how are you thinking about this negotiation? So one of the basic tools is am I thinking scarcity mentality, or am I thinking abundance? And he said, I'm thinking scarcity. I hadn't thought about that, but I am so stressed with my energy, with my budget, with my time, with my career. I need to get this thing to happen. So we spent quite a bit of time on getting him to expand his mindset, applying some of the improv techniques, to suspend judgment, and to actually think about this as an abundant playing field. The world has many opportunities for him. So he moved from scarcity to abundance thinking. Then we started looking at how he was feeling. So he was feeling completely defensive, feeling disrespected. And what we imagined pulling that open to, how could he move his mindset and his feeling toward being more optimistic? So we worked on that. And then we talked about how he was behaving. And he gave me examples of how he would start the meetings with a very manipulative, controlling agenda. And he rarely took time to listen to the other party. He hadn't realized that he really never asked him why he wanted to go into this deal with the UK company in New Zealand. On his performance, meaning his physical world, he had a lot of pain in his shoulders. He also wasn't eating. He would not spend any time readjusting to the Korean time zone and all of the demands that he would have when he goes there. We talked about ways that he could limit the stress and the anxiety he builds in his body with little sleep, little stretching, little exercise. So he started to put in some of those practices. And on the spiritual dimension, this was very interesting. And this is the key that unlocked it for him in his particular case. The spiritual dimension is that dimension where we believe in something bigger than ourselves. And many times we believe, in his case, he believed in some power bigger than himself. He also had a history of growing up very poor in the UK. And when he got this job in New Zealand, it was absolutely critical that he get this job completed, because it would have something to do with not only financially, but his self-esteem, and in terms of his locking himself into this company in the way that he wanted to. And he felt like there was some large force that was either against him, and he wanted to find that optimism with that force within him. And he believed so much in taking care of his family that he did not want his son to have to live with the kind of suffering that he did in his past. So he spent some time just looking at believing in the force that took him as far as he has. And he was able to actually anchor himself and center himself for the next negotiation. So fast forward, he checked in with me after that negotiation, and he actually spent more time listening than talking. He actually was curious and optimistic about what kind of solutions they could lay out with each other. And he also found out, and he explored the spiritual dimension with his counterpart, that this Korean man also grew up in a very poor family situation, needed this job, needed this negotiation to work. His self-esteem was on the line. I'm not sure how they discussed this, but this is what he found through their discussion. And he also had a son about the same age. So somehow they were able then to build that power with and start to engage with each other. And to make a long story short, concluding that negotiation, getting the contract, getting the supply to New Zealand worked fine. But more importantly for him, what was so important to him was that he developed a business partnership, and also they became friends, and they actually talked a lot about their sons, and he learned a lot more about Korea, South Korea. So that's just one example of how ultimately we would like to use these prep tools before we start a negotiation, and how we can use them even if we're in a deadlock, in a breakdown situation. So in order to move from power over and domination, how can we move to power with? By thinking more about abundance versus scarcity, and to think about larger forces and common interests and needs that we have that can create outcomes for partnerships and co-creation. Jorg, I'd like to check in with you.
Thank you, Karen. This is, I mean, I always love it, especially when you cover this particular model. I always love it because there is such power in it. And the case you explored said this. There are a number of questions coming through, and I think they're really interesting. I'll organize them a little bit. But one question is more a clarifying question. Would you say that the idea of inclusive leadership is actually facilitating environments to move from the power over to power with? Is that, I mean, I think the question is really trying to understand the connection between these ideas. But is the facilitation of from a power over environment to a power with environment, is that the essence of inclusive leadership?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Exactly. And that's why we use the tools of negotiation for that facilitation. That's why that is the raw material that inclusive leaders use. And it looks like there's no preparation for that. Some people make it look so easy. And we know that those who are very good at facilitation know that it's important to anchor our nervous systems first, so we can help manage the nervous system of the group or the partnership or the relationship. And that facilitation is the way that we can build communities that engage and co-create. That's the definition right there.
Yeah. And then there is another comment that's coming in, which I think is very interesting. And it says, it sounds like what you're describing is a shift in consciousness to a meta level, right? I mean, and I love both of these words, but it's almost, and I think this just came in when you were talking about your example of two people in a negotiation somehow managing to take an external view on themselves and each other.
Absolutely. Right. And this is what we've learned from brain science and the world of neuroscience. We do, as human beings, absolutely have the ability to observe ourselves and to manage ourselves. And I think the sciences around this, coming from social intelligence, emotional intelligence, have taught us so much that, yes, that is a meta negotiation. Exactly. And that's why I call it unseen.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. I mean, I love this. And there are a whole bunch of questions you've covered. I would say, or your examples were actually more from the kind of formal business environment, the type of things, whether it's negotiating a contract or whatnot. But it's obvious that we're talking about a much broader sense of negotiation. There are a few questions here that came in around the connection to diversity, equity, and inclusiveness of sorts, because that's also about power. Right. And one question is, when we're thinking about, the social norms around male-dominated norms, for example, or white male-dominated norms, or whatever you want to call this, isn't that essentially, so in other words, the idea of privilege and the norms that privilege has created, isn't this essentially a monopoly situation?
Well, is it? Really? Because if you break it down to the ultimate level of self-interests, let's just say you have a white male-dominated engineering company, and they are hiring people in the local environment. The real leverage is in somebody who is not from the corporate headquarters, may not be the same sexual orientation, may have some limitations in terms of their sight, or maybe there's a injury. These individuals at the local level have the resource of how we are going to manage, let's say, a distribution center in this local community. They actually have a lot of leverage. So I would say in most of those cases, when we break that down, there's a 50-50 leverage situation, that the corporate company needs something that the local has, no matter what color or ethnicity or experience that they've had. And usually this is why these companies work so hard to understand the diversity and the cultural norms in those regions.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, the idea of leverage in here seems to be essential there. And discovering our leverage. And I wonder, this may relate to another question here, because I'm curious, because your answer was interesting, to say, let's not fall into the trap of assuming we don't have leverage, right?
Right.
Let's actually challenge that assumption, because I think that's what we can easily fall into the mindset, the other ones are more powerful, I am not, right?
Yes.
And that needs to get tested. But how does this apply, and this is a great question here, to the idea of colonialism, for example, right? So the question is, colonialism is a form of power outside of the business world, right? I mean, and And maybe it's not entirely outside. Maybe the business world is actually shaped significantly by the corona. But this is my editorial comment here. But the question continues. It is often completely non-negotiable, right? I mean, because that power structure, I guess, has been set historically and so forth. So the question is really, would like to hear your thoughts on this power syndrome, which is somehow crystallized in colonialism. I hope I'm doing justice to the question, but.
Well, I love this concept, and you already know this about me, Jorg, is that I am a real optimist about the way that our societies can develop and evolve. And I think we live in the most interesting times. That just as an example, if you think about all of the colonial subjects, let's say of the UK, once the Queen has died, all we hear about now is the self-determination and a re-examining of the current subject structure. So to me, I just think there's an evolution in terms of consciousness around the whole concept of domination and the entire concept around control, manipulation, and making people do something they necessarily would not do. There's a huge movement around that in the world, and I see that especially in the world of inclusiveness and the whole world of diversity, that what's really at stake are these fundamental, huge paradigm shifts around that kind of freedom, that kind of dignity, and that kind of, I'd say, the need to negotiate for respect and to negotiate for that dignity. I think this is an interesting time.
I mean, and I'm just extending the question a little bit. I think I share that sense, actually, that we are in a period of time where established systems of domination are crumbling, right? And this is the time where we need inclusive leadership to renegotiate, right? I mean, it's a huge renegotiation at a historic level around concepts and ideas that most people, haven't perhaps even thought about or so, but they're also connected to our very individual experience and sense of identity, right?
Exactly.
And, but there is something I wonder sometimes about this, the power of our social cultural history to have shaped even our physical experience, right? When we talk about these dimensions, our thinking, how we feel, a baseline of feeling, how we engage socially, our networks even, our access to things, the physical sensations very frequently, and obviously the spiritual dimension. I mean, it all is in there, right? And it's breaking up. But it's a significant power. Domination is a significant experience.
Right. Exactly. And I guess that's one of the cool things that I learned. Let's just say, just my sense of observation. And then my undergrad was in social change and development. There were so many stories in history to show how those who were being dominated by structural resources, authority, dictatorships, found ways and communities that developed a whole nother culture, and that they did not see themselves as victims, and that they did understand they had a lot of leverage, and they used that leverage to build their own communities. So I think that humans have shown this ability to actually come out from underneath domination. It's just a fundamental wiring we have, is that we like that kind of dignity and we want that kind of respect, and we will engage with others to find it.
It's really interesting. So in a sense, you're saying, totalitarian systems of domination have tried to be total, right? But they
Right.
haven't been, right? I mean, and I think history bears that out,
Yeah.
and I think it's a really interesting perspective that you're offering on this. And please, whoever asked the question, feel free to just send in some commentary or so. Maybe there is an element to this question that we are not discussing or representing here. There is another question coming through. There is this sense of negotiation being obviously much bigger than the typical, or the association with negotiation. And
Right.
that, based on this discussion, it really starts with ourselves. What are we negotiating with ourselves if you look at these dimensions?
Yep. And that's why I emphasize and put really big in the middle of the prep model is to really explore who we are. And that simple little shift from thinking about scarcity versus abundance, feeling around defensiveness versus optimism, behaving in a competitive versus cooperative way, and then to go down and really understand physically, maybe I just am so tired and I'm in some pain, I can't step to the other party's side because that's all my focus is right now. And many times people will ultimately say, I've discovered that I need to take care of my blood pressure first and my anxiety before I can actually really lead and engage the way I would like to. Because spiritually, I believe in contributing to the world something positive, and I'm behaving completely opposite, and I'm totally disappointed with myself, and everybody just ignores me, doesn't actually help me with anything.
Right.
So I see that those are about anchoring ourselves and being committed to our own dignity. And we all have this ability. We all have this ability, and we all have more resources and leverage than we think we do.
I love your optimism about human nature and human resiliency and how this can work, by the way. And I do believe, I love this wording also of that we are living in times of quantum paradox. And maybe the times right now is where we are becoming aware of the quantum paradox, right? I mean, and that gives us new opportunities to lead. But I wonder what you have to say about the impact of COVID on this. So, I mean, COVID as perhaps one of the true global phenomena that we consciously process as a global shared experience of sorts, of course, with different manifestations for different groups. But I wonder how you view this COVID experience in this current time and the need to renegotiate those dominant systems.
Well, I just saw so many, including myself, because I was living in the world of uncertainty and danger and fear all around us. It really, first of all, came down to I needed to keep these dimensions in check. And then I actually worked with clients who were going through difficult times, and myself, I connected to those who actually were working at staying calm, as we need to find a collective calm while all of this turbulence and danger is going on all around us. Yeah. So it sounds simplistic, however, but it was one of the most powerful things I've seen all around the world. People I talked to, people who were managing their health, they were taking care of their emotions, they were finding ways that they could think in a more optimistic way, talk about building new circles. People built new circles around people who helped calm the nervous system. Yeah. And what I have discovered is a lot of people don't want to go back to that unhinged and that unanchored world where they were completely unaware of who they were and what they really wanted in life. That's, to me, one of the positive things, at least in my circle and what I've been researching, that people are discovering more of what they really need. and they want more dignity and freedom, and they found that they could create it in their own communities.
Great observation. And by the way, there's a comment, I don't know if you can see it, from the questioner on colonialism, right?
Okay.
Just pointing out the tremendous emotional toll that I guess that it is revealed by this, right? And to your point, this may seem simplistic or simple, but it's in no way easy, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. And I work with someone who does work on political forgiveness, talking about the spiritual dimension, that all of this domination, control, abuse, and violence, that it's really a lot of work is being done. And I've seen a lot of workshops where this has been successful, is to spend some time looking at forgiveness, not to forget justice, but to have forgiveness between the parties so they can stop the abusive, violent approach that they have to getting their dignity met. And that is a very deep spiritual practice, which she has a lot of great stories of international cases where you would think there is no way these parties should forgive each other. But there are some interesting processes that are going on in terms of individuals, communities, neighborhoods, associations, organizations starting to forgive the past and start looking at the future.
It's interesting to think of forgiveness. I can see so many instances in organizations, in the day-to-day organizational reality, how important forgiveness is, and it's never talked about. It's not practiced. It's not learned. Obviously, it's important in our societies at the moment. In so many societies that are torn apart, where divisiveness is rampant, and where that political forgiveness is something we need to tap now, but we probably never learned how to even do that, right? Because it's even a scarce, talking about scarcity, it's probably even a scarce commodity, forgiveness, in the interpersonal arena, right? So that's such an incredible point, actually. And I think that directly relates, from my perspective at least, again, to that notion of inclusive leadership.
Yeah,
we need to, as you said, facilitate this, but we also need to enable and encourage a spiritual practice along the way. Yeah, that's a really important insight here.
Yeah.
So I'm also looking at our time. We're just about at time. Are there any particular thoughts you want to leave us with today?
Well, I would just like to say that I can feel very certain today about my optimism, just in terms of what I have studied, because I love anthropology and deep history, long cycles of history. And I'm especially excited with the work we're learning in neuroscience, that I am certain that we can change every culture, dominating and controlling culture, whether it's in a relationship or if it's in an organization, by actually anchoring ourselves. So this work of integrated mind, body, spirit is absolutely essential to power. And I guess I would encourage everybody not to dismiss how fundamentally important it is to continue your practices around your mind, body, spirit, and having an integrated self. And I've talked a lot about how that anchor helps us in the most turbulent times. And it's like a buoy. We can get flipped over and we can get triggered. But if we are really anchored, we are able to right ourselves and to continue to actually provide the dignity and the calm that so many of us need. We all need that kind of calm and compassion.
Well, Karen, I'm always inspired when we talk, for sure. I hope that the audience, for this is equally inspired. And what I particularly love is to recast power as a kind of a phenomenon that we all somehow understand somehow or are implicated in, to power as a practice. Right. I think making that an active negotiating power actually with ourselves and with others as a real goal of our leadership practice. You know, I just love that thought.
Yeah, I like that. Let's use that. Power as a practice.
Power as a practice, exactly.
I like that.
Well, thank you, Karen. More to come, I know, but thank you for today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and thanks for tuning into this spotlight session, by the way. There's more to come, as you know, in our exploration of inclusive leadership, and I hope to see you on one of the upcoming spotlight sessions again. So thank you.